Now I want to present another crucial part of the missing pieces curriculum, and that's called the roots of violence. And these are 10 different items that I think represent the reasons so much violence happens. And when I present these, I like to emphasize that no matter what kind of trouble somebody's gotten into, they need to know these things. Primary reason is we live in a democracy, and the idea behind democracy is that we're all responsible for everybody else. And so even if our own ship is sailing pretty nicely, in a deeper kind of democracy, you still have the responsibility to look around you and see what kind of factors are out there that help create problems for yourself or other people. And then you have an obligation to try to address those issues. And I think whenever democracy starts to go to pot, it's because we've bought the line that we just got to look out for ourselves. It's not the idea of democracy. I think the other part of democracy that's so essential is diversity, functional diversity. That all those different parts are there, all those different issues are there, and that there's some place in the center where we all connect, we all meet, we all figure out how to get along. Now, I think the more we recognize these roots of violence, the more possible that's going to be. And when you're working with people that are in trouble, some of these roots of violence may have played a role in what happened to them. It might be part of the etiology, the origin of how they got in trouble. Or it might have nothing to do with it. And like I said, that's not the point. The point is that these are things we all need to know and recognize because they're happening all around us. And the less we intervene, the less we interfere, the less we take it on ourselves to try to do something about it, the more violence there's going to be. And the more likely it'll be that either us or people we care about are going to get impacted by that violence in some extremely negative way. Now, I just want to go through these 10 roots, try to explain them briefly. I'm just going to use this simple web and barrier as sort of a help to explain them when it'll make sense. Now, the first root I call exoskeletons. Now, this may stir up a memory in you, perhaps from high school biology. Exoskeletons refer to any kind of creature that has its skeleton on the outside of its body. That can mean a crayfish, a crab, a lobster, a beetle, any of those kinds of critters. As human beings, we have what you call endoskeletons. Our skeletons are on the inside. Now, the term exoskeleton also refers to kind of it's a societal term. And for many centuries, what it meant was that the government and the church provided kind of a skeleton, a structure around us that defined and determined what the rules were. What was okay, what wasn't, what was right, what was wrong, and not only that, but what would happen to you if you violated any of those rules. And I remember when I grew up, those exoskeletons were very clear. It's like, you do not criticize the government, you do not criticize the church, and we don't care whether what you're saying is right or wrong, you just don't do it, and if you do it, we will punish you. That's exoskeletons. Now, over the last, probably especially 30, 40 years, and I think it's been accelerating, there's more and more people who have no respect for the exoskeletons, whether that's the church, the state, lawyers, therapists, police, any number of things. And a lot of the reason for that is that some of those institutions have shot themselves in the foot. Like the Catholic Church is really reeling these days. Part of the reason is that they refuse to deal with the rotten apples in their own barrel, and now a lot of people think the entire barrel is rotten. A lot of people feel that way about the government. Now, whether or not you agree with that isn't the point. The point is that there's a lot of people who've given up on those exoskeletons. And when they give up on the exoskeletons, a tragedy occurs, which is that the reason for the exoskeleton was that it provided a moral structure that did not exist inside of a lot of individuals. So when people give up on the thing that's on the outside, They may not necessarily have a structure worked out on the inside to replace it. Not enough of us have done the work to figure out what all these parts of ourselves are and decontaminated our core enough that that can manage all these different things and keep it healthy and safe for ourselves and others. Whereas an exoskeleton kind of does that for you. You don't have to do that work. There's something here, there's a line, you cross it, things happen. But if you throw that out and you haven't done the work inside, then you're going to have more and more people whose basic philosophy in life is, well, I'll just do what I want to do. And besides, look at all those authorities. They all just did what they wanted to do, and they faked us out for a long time, and I ain't going to believe nothing any of them say anymore because they're all liars, and I'm going to get my piece of the pie. And that kind of anarchy is what happens when those exoskeletons no longer function and people haven't replaced it by doing their own work. And that leads to more violence. That undermines a lot of things. So that's roots of violence number one. Now, root of violence number two is based on a psychological term called derepression. It's not a term you see very much. I think you only find it in really expensive books. But I think everyone kind of knows the term repression. Put a lid on it, push it down, bottle it up, contain it. Derepression then means the process of undoing that, which can either be done psychologically, through a lot of work, like dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome, or it can be done more like an oil well. It's out of control and it just blows up and starts on fire and rages away. They're both forms of derepression. Now, there are other sort of more colloquial terms you can use to substitute for that psychological term derepression. One, you could say it represents emotional constipation. That you've pushed down inside you anger, rage, vengeance, anxiety, etc. You've just packed it all in, pushed it down, put a lid on it, and act like it's not there while it's eating you away from the inside. Or it's all sitting there building up pressure like a volcano that under the right conditions might blow, and anyone that's close enough to it to experience the impact will get hurt. That's another way to look at that idea of derepression. Now, another colloquial term that applies to it would be a more dietary concern. That derepression represents a steady diet of a particular substance, which is generally unpleasant to ingest and is more associated with the process of digest. So, what is that? Very simple. Eating shit. That is the diet that all too many people end up on for whatever reasons. And we all know that if you eat shit long enough, you end up full of shit. And if you're full of shit, then you start giving people shit. And if you start giving people shit, they eventually don't want your shit. And they'll shove your shit back at you. And once you're full of shit, you can't take no more shit. So that's why you start giving people shit. And it just sort of all goes around and ends up in a big shitty mess. Now, people who have eaten too much shit also have other problems, which is kind of like saying their core is so contaminated, so jammed up with crap, that if someone were to love him, that love isn't going to get in. It can't get through that stuff. If you're going to try to educate this person, this part up here might be pretty smart, and as a teacher you'd say, this kid can get this stuff. There's no reason they can't get this stuff. Well, yes, there is a reason. The reason is that there's so much derepression issues here. This person has eaten so much shit, they've got so much stuff bottled up in him, there's no room in the inn. That education, that information is not going to get in, much less utilized or processed. It's blocked. It's full. It's crammed. This closet's crammed with stuff, and if it opens, it's all going to fall all over the place. That's what derepression is about. Now, to make that even more practical, the way I'd see this usually happening is if you learn a lot of this at home. If you've got a father who's not very mature on a core level, he cannot take criticism. If he gets angry about something, you better just sit and listen and keep your mouth shut, because he wants to get rid of his shit, and he don't want you to give him any shit back. If you give him some shit back, he will really give you some shit. And so that's where people often learn to start storing this stuff up. And later in life, I mean, that's the basic dynamic you learn, plus you're just carrying this stuff around. And in a healthy family, what I call a healthy family, it isn't that things like that don't happen. There's still times when, one or both of your parents goes off on you, they get really upset, mean things are said, maybe they even hit you. But in a healthy family, that parent is going to recognize what they did at some point. Either recognize it in the moment and stop, go away, cool off, or maybe a day later, a week later, they're going to come back to you and say, man, I blew it. I'm really sorry. It wasn't your fault. Here's what set me off. I was unreasonable. How can we make this good again? In a healthy family, bad things happen, but they get dealt with. In an unhealthy family, things happen and they get shoved down. You eat it. You're not allowed to tell somebody that they screwed up, especially if they have more power than you. You have to keep your mouth shut. You have to carry that in you, and you become more and more emotionally constipated. And we see that in the schools a lot. Kids come in, they're carrying around all this stuff. They can't learn. They're touchy. It doesn't take much to set them off. We pass them on to another class. We pass them on to the principal. Pretty soon they're passed right out of the school system. They're just hard to deal with. And I think there's more and more kids out there who are carrying around more of this stuff. And it isn't just at home. They get it on the streets. Mom sends them down to the store to get something. Mom, I don't want to go. Why not? Just go get it. Well, I don't like those kids on the corner. Ignore them. Okay, Ma. Well, they never bother me. I don't know why they'd bother you. Well, the kid knows he's going to eat some shit. It just goes on. It's all over the place. It's in school. And again, you think of that church scandal I was mentioning a moment ago. How many victims of those priests had to eat shit? And then if they try to go to the church on a higher level, they ate more shit. That didn't happen. You're exaggerating. That's ridiculous. It went on and on as they got crazier and crazier. See, you were screwed up. You were an addict. You were into drugs. That's what really happened. You're just trying to blame us. That just goes on and on. So again, derepression. It's a very big thing. The more people we have carrying this stuff around in them that are full of shit, unless we can teach them how to handle that, unless we can help them start to move that stuff, which is part of what I call decontamination, to get rid of it, get it moving, to get used to being in a system where, yeah, bad things happen, but people deal with it and take responsibility. It doesn't store up here. It doesn't reach toxic levels. Okay. Third principle, the roots of violence, is what I call the flushing syndrome. For that, I need 2 of these little toys and a bigger barrier. Now, this woman named Frances Wicks discovered this. She was a psychoanalyst in Austria. Earlier in the 20th century, early 1900s. And she treated the kids of a lot of wealthy people. And they would send their kids to Vienna. She would give them therapy every day. Usually after a few weeks, they'd improve. She'd send them home. Case closed. But then she'd get another letter. Oops, the kid's acting up again. What can we do? Well, this didn't make sense to her. She thought she had the problem solved. What's really going on? Well, I think what happened was that kid comes in. She works with the kid. It's not too hard to decontaminate it. Stuff hasn't been there a long time. It hasn't festered a long time. We cleared it out. The kid's feeling better. Cool. Send the kid home. Well, when the kid goes home, there may be some parent there that has a massive barrier, a massive amount of stuff stored up down here that they're not dealing with at all. And as soon as the kid's back home, even though mom or dad up on this level is so glad to see you're feeling better, doing better, etc., the kid immediately starts to get radiated by this nuclear family waste down this level. And within a few weeks or a few months, they're just as contaminated as ever, all over again. Because dad over here maybe has $1 million barrier, okay? When he shoves his shit down, it ain't coming back up. Junior has a $50,000 barrier. Someday you have $1 million barrier just like dad, but you just don't pick them up at an early age. So when dad's $1 million shit rolls downhill, this $50,000 barrier ain't going to stop much of it. And it's going to go right into his core. And not only does dad shit go into his core, but it goes into a kid's core, and a kid who does not know how to handle that level of shit. So the kid's going to start acting it out. It blows his circuits. Well, is dad going to suddenly go, oh my God, Johnny, that's terrible. I should have took care of that. Now let's roll downhill. No. Just as family systems often points out, this is the identified victim now. This is where the problem originated. It sure didn't originate over here. It's what I call the flushing syndrome. People with bigger barriers flush their stuff down. It ends up in somebody else's yard. That person can't handle it. They act out. Then they get blamed for it 100% because this person here, the moment they flushed it, as far as they're concerned, it no longer existed, and they won't take any responsibility for it. That's the flushing syndrome. And again, the more people we have like that, and it's like we do it inside ourselves. We push stuff down because we don't want to deal with it. We flush it. We pick up stuff that other people flushed. On a national level, people flush things. They don't want responsibility for it. They misread something. They intentionally mislead. Because it gets flushed. It gets pushed downhill. Let them deal with it. Let them deal with it on a local level, state level, whatever. All right, that's the flushing syndrome. Now, there's another step to this, which is roots of violence number 4, and that is that institutional, corporate, and governmental crime goes undetected and unpunished, and therefore does damage to the fabric of society. It's like saying the flushing syndrome operates on an even bigger level. Now, I'll give you an example of that. In 1993, this study came out. NPR talked about it on their radio show. The Department of Justice had done a study to figure out what the cost of street crime and corporate crime was for that particular year. Now, and this was for the entire United States. So in your mind, just sort of imagine, what could that be? And a lot of people usually guess 5-10 billion, something like that. It's more common. The actual figure is $19 billion. It's a fair chunk of change. And then I often ask people then, okay, you've guessed that. Now, what do you think the cost of corporate crime for that same year was? And again, now let's keep in mind, corporate crime, these are leading citizens. These are business people. These are people that we typically trust. We don't watch them all that carefully, or typically we haven't. Up until recently, we haven't necessarily thought there was a great need to do that, or they told us there wasn't. Well, this is 1993, 10 years ago, way before Enron and Global WorldCom and all those other people. Okay, what do you think it is? Let me make sure I got the exact figure here. 470 billion. That's about 25 times as much. Now, you'd think if that were the case, that people would focus more on corporate crime, less on street crime. But I think part of the factor is that street crime is scarier to most people. It's more visible. It's on the street. You see it. And politically, it's a lot easier to point to that stuff and get people riled up than it is to point at corporate crime, because it's hard to detect corporate crime. And even if you do, it's hard to prosecute it because legions of lawyers come out of the woodwork and slow everything down. I don't even need to go there. Where I want to go is, I think there's a connection between street crime and corporate crime. That connection is that if there's $470 billion essentially being stolen, this is way back in 93, then that means taxes aren't being paid on that. And that means the government has less money for education, welfare, medical assistance for people who can't afford it, educational assistance, etc., etc. Now, to me, there's going to be some people who are barely making it, barely keeping their head above water. And at the moment, they really need some help. The help ain't going to be there because these other guys stole it. So they're going to go under. They're going to get desperate. They're going to do stupid things. They're going to get in trouble. Now, at that point, you think the big boys who stole the $470 million are going to raise their hands and say, I should have known that was the wrong thing to do and should have seen what that might lead to. I'm so sorry. If I hadn't done that, it's possible that you wouldn't have done what you did because some of that help would have been there, but now the help isn't there, and I took it for myself. I didn't necessarily need it, but it's kind of fun to have a big house and go on trips all the time and have people like you cleaning my boots for me, but I'm sorry. I won't do it again, and what can we do to fix that up? Well, how likely is that to happen? We've already seen more recently that some people like Quest executive here, Minnesota, that made off of 200 million, I'm sure legitimately. And, these Enron people, I don't see any of them lining up to give the money back or to make good use of it. It's like it takes legions of other lawyers to go after them, and they have to prove every damn little thing in order to make them accountable for any little fraction of it. So, again, it's the Flushing syndrome on a much grander scale. And it has many ripple effects. And that's part of what I just wanted to point out. It's not just the exoskeleton thing where you see the people at the top taking advantage and then finally say, well, if they're going to do it, I'm going to do it. It's also that if people are stealing things, then the help other more vulnerable people need isn't there, and they're more likely to get desperate and to get blamed for everything. It's just a psychological principle applied to socio-political reality for what it's worth. Okay, number 5. Many kids are raised by parents with lower core maturity levels. Okay, here's the deal. Everybody has their chronological age and their psychological age. And that's why I'm going to say things like, act your age, not your shoe size. Well, what if you're growing up in a home where, your mom or dad's psychological age is 4 or 5 years old? Maybe they're hardworking, maybe they're bums. Whatever the situation is, they ain't got much maturity. Well, by the time you get to be 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, you're already matching the maturity level of your parents when push comes to shove. When the pressure's on and they melt down, they got less going on than you do, okay? That is a very problematic thing. How are you going to live in a house like that? Goes back to that derepression thing. If you got a dad who cannot take criticism, or a mom who cannot take criticism, and no matter how grievous, no matter how out of line they are, you can't say nothing or they're going to go berserk. That is a lower core maturity level. On this level, they need to be respected, they need to be looked up to whether they deserve it or not. But you have to live with the psychological reality day after day after day. So even if they don't think they got the problem, you got to figure out a strategy to deal with it. And I think there's 4 basic strategies that kids come up with. And actually, kids these days are in a little better position to deal with it than they were in the past. In the past, the major way to deal with it was just to run away and leave home. A lot of kids did it. They ran away and got jobs. They were 13, 14, 15 years old, and they were already on their own, making their own way. Got the hell out of, Jackson or whatever the town is. And these days, kids still do that, but it's a little harder to run away. You're a little more likely to get caught and brought back. So there's some newer variations, such as you become a mall rat. You go out and hang out at the mall or the street corner. You basically run away and you come home when your parents are asleep or they're drunk, or you just sneak in when they don't see you, but essentially you're gone all the time. You just stay out of their hair. That's one way to take it. So a fair amount of kids have become caretakers. Mom and dad aren't handling things, or maybe mom's working 2 jobs and we ain't seen dad for 5 years. So the oldest kid or kids got to help the younger kids make sure they got clothes and food, and the shopping gets done, the cleaning gets done, mom's too tired. And in some more dysfunctional homes, the kids got to provide other services which they shouldn't have to have anything to do with. Might include just getting their parents cleaned up after they pass out, Or it might be providing more sexual essential services, which mom and dad have no right to ask for, but they take it anyway. And that's another thing that happens to kids. Now, another thing kids can do is disappear into their own internal world, just close things out. And that's what's a lot easier today. In fact, some parents encourage it. Here's a Nintendo, go lose yourself. You know? And kids now have computers, the internet, video games. They got these MP3 players with incredible headphones. They can go into a, beautiful oral world where they're just inundated by gorgeous music at a sound quality level that was unimaginable in the past. They can get some dope, some speed, sneak a little alcohol, and mom and dad can go at it, beat each other up all night long, and it doesn't matter. You're gone. Got your own world. You can tune them out. And I think a fourth strategy is that some kids declare war. They say, mom and dad are so screwed up. I'm just sick of them. From now on, I'm going to go out of my way to make their life miserable in any way that I can. There won't be a damn thing they can do about it. I'm going to undermine them, undercut them, screw things up, drive them nuts. And they deserve it. And all these are ways that kids survive. How do I get through my youth? How do I get through my adolescence? Well, that's how they're going to do it. The problem is, once they become an adult, what have they learned? They don't have much on the ball anymore. And most of the people they learned from have had very poor skills. And also because they're insecure, they don't want their kids going and getting help, guidance from other people. It's like, if I'm not good enough, you're going to get nothing. And so by the time a kid grows up, all he's learned is dysfunctional stuff. The easiest thing to do is just to fall into the old ruts that your parents set up for you, because they haven't given you much tools or necessarily even admitted to you what the problems are. So you're kind of stuck. And that's that particular root of violence. That too many kids have parents with lower core maturity levels. And that means just basically we got more and more kids coming out there who are not equipped to deal with social reality, are not equipped to work, are not equipped to negotiate the ups and downs, ins and outs of normal relationship problems. And for every kid like that, it's going to fall back on us. Now, the sixth one is just people have a deep need for community. That's another root of violence. And essentially, if people don't have community, then someone is going to have to provide it for them. Well, in the old days, people lived in communities. They had aunts, uncles, lots of people around to help them out. And they felt like they belonged to something. They got challenged. They got taught things. Well, in our increasingly fragmented situation, there's more and more kids that just don't have much community. Their parents don't have time to provide community. None of the relatives live around, nor do they have time anyway. You don't know your neighbors. You don't want to know your neighbors. And one of the reasons gangs, I think, have some value for kids is that, like it or not, sometimes they provide a sense of membership, belonging. Somebody who cares about you, they notice if you're not around. They put you through tests. You have to earn your way. And if you're good, you get recognition. You rise within the ranks. You get more power, more privileges. And there may be no other place available for that kid to get any of that. He doesn't have a mother or father who either have the time or the willingness to do it. There's no extended family willing to do it. They sure as hell aren't involved in church. School is a joke. Police are a joke. But the need is there, and that's part of what this word of violence is about. Is people need community. It's an essential need. Whether they say they need it or not, or say they want it or not, they're still going to need it. And if you need something, you will find it in one form or another. And if you're desperate enough, it doesn't matter if it's a healthy form, you'll get it. And that need can get met in the context of a gang, even if the gang does things that are destructive to the larger community as a whole. As long as it works for those people, it works. And unless we find ways to help more of those people get that need met, they're going to get the need met by default. Now, another root of violence is another essential need, which is the need for mirroring. And that's a very simple thing. It's like saying, for us to feel good on a core level, to feel like we have value, to feel sane, then on this ego level, we've got to have some level of recognition, attention, different things like that, or it's just not going to work. And mirroring also means it's like the world around you reflects something back to you. And we need to have that experience, or we're going to go out and get it. A simple example is if a kid doesn't feel valued, visible, at home or in school, an easy way to do it might be one day he brings to school a gun. Doesn't mean he's got to use it. He's just got to show a few people, and all of a sudden, his value goes up. He's got some cachet. We have young women who, wear these tight-ass little, jeans that dip down past their navels. And it's like, you take one look at them and you can see every little curve and contour of their body. There's not much left to the imagination. And that's an easy way to get some mirroring. It's like they get looks, they get attention, they get admiration, they get lust, they get desire. It's like something's coming in. And it gives me a boost, And if I'm not getting enough mirroring in my life in general, or if I never have, if I've got a deficit inside of me, then I need that mirroring, and I'm going to find ways to get it, even if that puts me at risk. Even if that puts me in deeper water than I know how to swim in. I'm going to do it because I need the juice. I need the juice. And we all need it every day. We all need to have work where we feel valued. Not work where we come in and the boss, chooses out every day and says, I got 20 other monkeys who could do it better than you. I don't know why you're even around. That kind of stuff eats at us. If you're in a relationship where when you walk in the house, your wife just scrunches up her nose and walks into a different room without a word, that's going to eat at you. You're not getting any positive mirroring. And if you never got enough growing up, that means you got a hunger inside you already, and what's going on day to day is going to make you even hungrier. And you're going to be a desperate person. And desperate persons do desperate things. So again, why it's a root of violence is just that we have to have positive mirroring. If you don't get it, you will find some way to get it, and it may not be good. Teenage pregnancies result from the excessive need for mirroring, or the need for compensatory mirroring. It's one of the reasons it's there. If I feel like crap down in my core, I'm going to need drugs. I'm going to be more likely to turn to drugs, because the feeling that I get from those drugs will make up for that mirroring, that lack of positive mirroring. Now, just to sum up a little bit, even drugs are about mirroring, because when you get a certain kind of high, you'll feel good in your core in a way that you're not able to get it from the rest of the world. So drugs end up being a compensatory way of getting your mirroring needs met. And the same with certain kinds of sexual activity. Or if a man's having an affair, sometimes it's because he doesn't feel adequately mirrored in the relationship, doesn't know how to do it, or there's so many issues they need to deal with first before they can get back to some good mirroring. That's just easier to go off here and to strip club or having an affair or this or that, someplace where you can get it easier. When sex offending, another example is why do grown men take up with teenagers or even younger boys or girls for sexual purposes? Well, sometimes it's because it's a shortcut to get your mirroring needs met. It's easier to impress someone young. It's easier to get that look of admiration or longing or need from them than it sometimes is to get that from one of your peers or from your lover who you're currently on the fritz with, and they're, angry at you, so you're not likely to get it without doing a little bit of work. So it's easier just to find a shortcut, or if you feel like you lack social skills, you lack confidence, you don't know how to make a connection with who you really want to, go for someone younger. It's easier. It's easier to get that mirroring. Maybe, it just occurred to me, maybe that's even why politicians tell lies, because they love being mirrored. So why not promise this? Why not promise that? Why not say two contradictory things, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, in order to get those groups of people to all applaud? And comics, if you're going to survive in the world, you got to have mirroring as a comic. If you're not, you're out of work. Now, let's go on to the next root of violence, unconscious rank and privilege. It's kind of a fancy way of saying that some people have more power than others. And the more power that you have, the more effect you have on other people. And therefore, the more power you have, the more obligation you have to notice the effect you have on other people. Simple example might be like Kathie Lee Gifford a number of years back was confronted about the fact that she had this line of clothing that made her millions of dollars, and a reporter said, "Hey, Kathie, you know what? Most of the people making your clothes are like kids getting paid a couple, $3 a day. They're like slaves, and that's how you're getting rich. Did you know that?" And Kathie Lee Gifford got really angry, and essentially, I think, said, "You're a liar. That's ridiculous." And to her credit, she investigated the situation and discovered, son of a gun, there was a lot of truth to it. So rank and privilege is like saying, if you're collecting millions of dollars and putting it in the bank, it's on you to notice how that money's getting made. And you're really responsible for it. Now, you may say, what's the relevance of this? Well, if you're a treatment provider of some kind, or a policeman, or this or that, you have to notice how you use your power. You have to notice that sometimes if you take something personally from someone else, if I'm a therapist in a sex offender program, for instance, and I get into a power struggle with somebody, I could make a phone call and have them back in jail in no time at all. If I'm a policeman and I take something personally that somebody says to me on the street, I might just pick up something and beat them with it, or I might just arrest them for who knows what, or I might say something I regret saying, just in the heat of that moment. When the more power I have, the more obligation I have to make sure my own core is dealt with. That I've cleaned up my own stuff. And also, it just means that I have to notice, like, if you ever travel out of the country, the moment you set foot in Mexico or some other third world country, you're rich the moment you set foot there. So you can just immediately assume everyone around you is lazy and doesn't want to work. Or you might just notice that, hey, there aren't a whole lot of jobs here. People work for little or nothing, so I can probably afford to be a little generous, more generous than usual, to anyone that helps me because they need the help. That's noticing my rank and privilege. And again, the less people notice that, the more people are going to be irritated or feel cheated or slighted, and the more likely violence might result. That's just a simple law of basic social intercourse that often gets neglected and leads to trouble. The ninth root of violence is that violence provides a momentary freedom. Now, this is probably one of the things that maybe least understood about violence. A lot of people just go, why would you want to do that? Or how could you do that? Or, violence is just wrong. It hurts people. Well, that's all true. But if you're a so-called normal person, on this level, you're trained, you're educated, you get rewards for doing your job and behaving. Now, if you don't have those benefits or perks, if your life isn't going so well on this level, then you may be more tempted to find ways to access your core. And when people are violent, like, I talk about when people act out or are violent, they flip. Well, when you flip up, suddenly You go from being in touch with 10% of yourself to being in touch with 90% of yourself. It's like you're 10 times more alive when you're acting out. And yes, there may be anger, rage, vengeance, all those sorts of things there. But if you feel more alive, who cares? And if you've got a good job and a good marriage and a nice house, you've got a lot to lose. But if you've got nothing to lose, then when you flip up, you got nothing to lose. And so you've got a freedom, you've got a wholeness. We often throw the word around wholeness as though the only way you can be whole is by being good. Well, you can be whole by being wholly bad as well. And by just unleashing your whole being, however raw, unformed, undisciplined, immature it may be, you still feel whole because there's more parts of you engaged at that moment. The whole engine is running. You got all the horsepower, and that feels good. Feels a lot better than being working at a crappy job for crappy wages and no respect. It's like at least in those moments when you're acting out or beating the crap out of somebody or whatever it is you're doing, you feel alive, you feel powerful, you feel strong, you feel respected. And for some people, that's worth just about anything. That's the pearl of great price. May not be for you. Maybe no way in the world you'd ever let yourself do it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work for somebody else. So that's one of the roots of violence. And it's a root of violence in the sense that people need that experience. And if they can't get it legitimately, they will get it illegitimately because they want to feel that alive. They want to feel that wholeness. And violence is one way to get there that works. And the last root of violence is that society tends to ignore those people that are dead inside. Now, another part of our curriculum, we go a lot into the Holocaust self, which is a way of talking about people that have severe damage on a core level, which is another way you could say they're kind of dead inside. And in our society, we could argue that people who get in trouble are like canaries in a coal mine. And if we take a good look at those people and how they got there and what went into them becoming that way or giving themselves permission to be that way, we can learn a lot about where we as people as a whole are going, if we want to look at that. And I think also in our society, when people have been really damaged, they tend to get ignored, shoved aside. Maybe they end up in prison, but they just aren't going to get much attention unless they make trouble. And I think that becomes a root of violence because the people who most need attention are often the people who least get it or get the least of it when they need it most and get plenty of attention later when the problem's gotten to the point where something's out of control. And if we want less violence in our society, we have to start figuring out what makes people dead inside and how do we counteract that. And until we do that, we're going to have more trouble. Now, just to cap this all up, like I said earlier, you look at any particular case of violence, maybe none of these factors are involved. Maybe in some of them, they're all involved. But the major thing is that they're all kind of a breeding ground for violence. These are all factors that contribute to the possibility of it. And the thing to keep in mind is that the United States of America is one of the most violent places on earth. Not in the political sense necessarily, not in the sense that we got a war in our own borders, but that we have the largest number of people imprisoned compared to any other country on earth. We have a very high level of violence for being a member of the Western civilized world, so to speak. And I think these roots of violence are part of the reason that that comes about. And until each of us figure out ways to address those issues in any way that they cross our paths, well, then those things are just going to get worse. But those are the roots. And again, like with a dandelion, unless you address the roots, the problem's going to keep growing. And even if you lock them all up, it'll grow back.